July 4th, next Sunday, is a time when we traditionally here at Unity think about the ideals that this country was founded on: freedom, unity, the brotherhood of man, and our motto, "In God We Trust." At Unity of New Orleans, we study the principles which represent the same ideals of unity, inner freedom, and God. So, what does freedom really mean? How do you free yourself from what the mystics and philosophers and statesmen term slavery of body and mind? Outer and inner slavery both connote being controlled by some outer forces. Outer slavery, of course, has now been abolished in America, but only we can free ourselves from our inner slavery. The ideals of freedom and democracy were around for thousands and thousands of years before they became a political reality here in America. They were the dream of enlightened souls from the Egyptian mystery schools through Plato, Buddha, Jesus, Voltaire, to name a familiar few. The Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten was born in 1388 BC. He was said by many to have been more divine than human. He was considered to be the first pacifist, the first monotheist, the first democrat, the first humanitarian, and the first to found a religion, 1388 BC. He devoted his life to the perfection of his mystical doctrine that he believed in. To Akhenaten, God wasn't some mighty warrior speaking through the priests or flying around up there on the clouds in his chariot. God was a gentle father who loved his children of every race and nationality, and he wanted his children to live in peace and unity. Pharaoh Akhenaten traveled throughout the land, the countryside, freely conversing with all of the people, the peasants and the slaves. He shared the simple food with the poor. He could not accept the inequalities of birth or wealth that he had inherited. He proclaimed brotherly love and felt that all humans had the divine right to pursue happiness and perfection. He always referred to his wife, Nefertiti, as his beloved wife, and he was the only pharaoh of Egypt who chose to be depicted with his arm around his wife. Egyptologist Professor James Breasted said, and I quote, "There died with him such a spirit as the world has never seen." He was the first real proponent of democracy and a nation founded on the idea of "In God We Trust." The Greeks also advanced the idea of a democratic form of government. In his writings about Atlantis, Plato immortalized this ideal about the philosopher king who would perfect himself with years of self-purification, self-discipline, and wisdom. He discussed in detail a democratic society that was based on unity and freedom for all. Fast forward to the 17th century of Enlightenment, the Enlightenment writer Voltaire, who presented his idea of democracy in the novel Candide, which is studied by all serious French students, including my own. In the chapter termed El Dorado, Voltaire presents his ideal government, which was originally Plato's, by the way. There is a philosopher king who is elected by the people for the people. Everyone is happy and healthy, wealthy and wise in El Dorado. When some visiting Westerners ended up there by chance, they asked the citizens of El Dorado all kinds of questions, and one of them was, well, what are your prisons like? And the El Doradans said, prisons? What do you mean prisons? We do not know this word. And the Westerners answered, "You know those places where you send people who break the law." The Eldoradans answered, "Oh, we have no such place. Here the laws are made by the people, for the people. Why would anybody break the law?" Even though the ideas of democracy and freedom are old and familiar, they have always been considered heretical in terms of practice. Freedom versus a caste system, a democratic government versus the ironclad power of the despotic kings, the brotherhood of man versus fierce clan fighting, a nation under one God versus a plethora of different gods, each thought to be supreme and fought for. But in America, these heretical ideas were finally brought to life in physical form in a brand new place. They were imperfectly implemented at first, as we all know, in terms of slavery, the treatment of the Native Americans, etc. But at least the principles were here. The principles. America was the democratic promised land that the enlightened ancients and European Enlightenment had dreamed of putting into form. And this is what we have inherited, a physical place and spiritual truths that can, if implemented, enable us to live in a land of freedom and unity where in God we trust. The cost of our ticket is to live up to these ideals, or we risk the show closing down, and there's no refund on those tickets. It's closed down before. For example, life in a promised land is much of what the Old Testament is all about. Moses freed, remember, the chosen ones from slavery in Egypt, and he led them right up to the promised land, and they eventually got in the promised land. But after that, time and time again, the chosen ones did not obey the eternal laws that Moses had brought them in form. And time again, the chosen ones lost their land. Their land was stolen. They were enslaved by other nations. At Unity, we read these stories, of course, metaphysically, as fables, symbols, and allegories. Basically, they explain karma in simple, childlike ways to simple, childlike people of the time. But the truths in these stories are just as true today. If we don't live up to the ideals of our promised land, we risk losing our dream. And not because some angry God is punishing us, but because we are just out of sync with the eternal laws of the universe. So chaos ensues, kind of like it does in our personal lives. Simple cause and effect, karma. So the price we must pay for our ticket to enjoy all that this great country was founded on, the democratic principles and unity and in God we trust, is to live by the principles so that we can enjoy our promised land. How can we, as individuals, evolve and develop these skills individually and as a nation so that we have more happiness and less stress? Let's look for a moment at how America has actually done this. Let's say that your personal inward evolution parallels the external evolution of America. And let's put that in computer terms, loosely, like Stephen Denton did in his book, Sacred America, Sacred World. And I'm really not quoting him because I took all kinds of liberties with it, but he had that idea. Using the metaphor of the language of software operating systems, let's say that the founding of America was a 1.0 operating system. Y'all remember that years ago? It was a new system based on high hopes and ideals. In America, this was the Declaration of Independence in 1776. It maintained that all men were created equal and had certain inalienable rights. Great and noble idea, but the operating system had to be upgraded because there was slavery, and the 13 colonies couldn't get along and agree on anything, including a common currency that would allow trade and travel. The country had no leader to organize things because the people were still wary of their despotic kings in Europe. America was thus vulnerable to foreign invasion because there was no centralized army or even a way to collect the funds from all 13 different colonies to pay for the army. So, a 2.0 operating system came into being, the Articles of Confederation, ratified in 1781. They provided a means to unite the 13 colonies so that trade, a common currency, and mutually beneficial cooperation could happen. It was a good idea, but in reality, it proved to be rather a mess, and there was still slavery. In terms of our personal growth and consciousness, perhaps we could say that our 1.0 operating system is when we realize that there is a higher way to live. This is a huge step in consciousness. But like the initial adopting of these ideals in America, we may not really manifest them at first, our ideals. But at least we are aware that there is something more to life than seeing it as a jungle out there where money, power, and survival of the fittest ego desires are all it's about. Evolving out of this Darwinian social view of survival of the fittest is a huge step in our evolution of consciousness. Maybe in reality, we at first still have one foot in both worlds. Does that sound familiar to anybody? But at least we aren't just stimulus response machines anymore. We know there's something else. For example, Thomas Jefferson believed in the freedom of all men and was a primary author of the Declaration of Independence. He had a higher vision that he put forward. He knew what he wanted and what he wanted there to be, but he still owned slaves. But the first step to our personal evolution is a commitment to the idea of higher ideals. And I don't think anybody would be here today if you hadn't already upgraded to a 1.0 operating system. This is a huge upgrade to the operating system of most people. Another example is our national motto, E pluribus unum, which means out of many, one. But at first, the 13 colonies just couldn't unite and be one. But they had an aim, and this eventually paved the way where they could get somewhere. But we have to have the aim first. After the advent of the physical founding of America and its high ideals of freedom, 1.0 operating system, and an upgrade to 2.0 and the Bill of Rights, let's say that there was then an upgrade to 3.0. Like most upgrades, this one was precipitated by flaws in the system. In the case of our country, the flaws were that despite its lofty ideals, the reality still wasn't reflecting them. There was still slavery. There were still problems between the 13 colonies not liking each other. Thus, the Constitution came into being in 1787. The Constitution was meant to ensure, they thought, the freedom of all people. Again, more of an ideal than a reality, but an upgrade, which eventually led to the reality. You have to have the upgrade first. On a personal level, that upgrade to 3.0 operating system might be when we start taking that light and shining it within ourselves so that we can see our blind spots. How many people do that? We can no longer hide from the light, maybe. We start seeing where we're not living up to our ideals. Maybe we believe in lofty ideals, but when it comes right down to it, we're forced to see that we're still not walking the walk. We aren't practicing what we preach. Maybe we see people as objects to be used in our personal drama, not to be appreciated as fellow beings. We smile at those, we're nice to those who can benefit us in some way, maybe in our business, maybe they stroke our egos. Our egos dominate our ideals still at this point. So we need to upgrade the operating system again. In terms of America, the upgrade to its operating system to 3.0 was the abolition of slavery. America had the lofty ideas, 1.0, and it upgraded to accepting its shortcomings, 2.0, but then when it acted on this belief, it upgraded to 3.0. In terms of Thomas Jefferson, maybe this is when he actually freed his slaves, which he did in his will. Maybe the upgrade to a 4.0 nation was when women were given the equality and the right to vote too. From 1920 to 1933, we were actually deemed capable of casting a vote. In terms of our personal consciousness to a 4.0 system, it might be when we start treating everyone as a child of God, even people we don't particularly think are worthy and we have no affinity toward. The rise to a 5.0 nation might have been something like the New Deal legislation during the Great Depression of 1929. The government gave a helping hand to people who were desperate and hungry, so they and their children didn't die of starvation. The government provided jobs. This might be considered an example of walking the talk, putting your money where your mouth is kind of thing. Let's say that 5.0 in terms of my personal evolution might be when I actually help those whom I don't care about. Maybe I forgive my enemies. I turn the other cheek. I evolve to the point of knowing that they are often just acting out, crying for love, like my students who act out often when they come from alcoholic homes and are desperate for attention and love. They are in need, and I institute my personal New Deal legislation. Instead of giving them detentions, which I still may do, you have to, I actually give them what they need: understanding, compassion, and kindness. I see the teachers nodding their heads here. The upgrade to a 6.0 nation might be when many Americans started demanding global unity and freedom. Maybe the United Nations and other organizations were a stab at that. If America, that was founded on those ideas, doesn't do this, who's going to? Think about it. Personally, The 6.0 level in our evolution might be when we start actually advocating for others, doing something about it, even toward those toward whom we have no personal affinity, just because we really know it's the right thing to do. Maybe we write our congressman about sending the COVID vaccine to third world countries that we don't like, we've never been to, and don't care about. Maybe we push for student exchanges with communist China. Maybe we join the World Hunger Organization. Maybe we advocate against killing and torturing animals for food and experiments and find a more humane way to eat and advance science. Maybe we give psychiatric counseling to help drug-addicted veterans suffering from post-traumatic syndrome from too many tours in Vietnam or Afghanistan. I apologize for my examples. If they seem political or if they offend anyone in here, I really don't mean to. I am just trying to give you some concrete examples to help clarify the general idea. I am not a political person. Each of us must do what our heart tells us is right. But an upgrade to a 6.0 operating system would include doing something to help other beings, and not just those in our bubble. It's just doing what's right. An upgrade to a 6.0 operating system in America might be when everyone, like maybe even Democrats and Republicans, actually commit to listening to each other, cooperating, and doing what's best for everyone on planet Earth. This is an upgrade, and we all know it. This is evolution, and it sure beats revolution. I will again offer an oversimplified example. The United States aided Japan and Germany after World War II economically. Not helping Germany after World War I is primarily what precipitated World War II and the death of 70 million people on our planet. So it certainly is an example of how doing the right thing avoids chaos for all of us. Talk about practical spirituality. An upgrade to 6.0 operating system in our personal lives might be when we forgive our former enemies, knowing that they know not what they do. Maybe the result is even that we have a new friend or ally, like Germany and Japan. Sure beats fighting them. At the least, it makes our lives less stressful. The upgrade to a 6.0 system takes into consideration that we are globally connected, as the internet, COVID, and global trade has certainly shown. So it behooves us to cooperate for our own good. We're all part of the all. This has always been a universal law. But recently, we are really seeing why in our exterior world we have to act that way in unity. Interdependence and cooperation are the upgrades that will allow our very survival, personally, politically, pandemically, and pragmatically. A 6.0 operating system can extend our American ideals of freedom and unity for all and serve as an example to the world. But we've got to get our act together first. The 13 colonies finally did it, and they didn't like it at all. They didn't like each other at all, but they did it. And the result? America. There were growing pains, but the result was incredible. Maybe a 6.0 operating system will mean that America now sets the example for world peace because we have shown how we can be peaceful and work together, no matter what our political background or religious or any other background. We have learned to cooperate. At this July 4th time, I humbly ask you to think on these things. Consider the ideals of unity and freedom more globally. If America doesn't do it, who will? We have the experience. We've already done it. We've turned the ideal into reality here. But most of all, we personally need to upgrade our hearts and spread the unity ideals of unity, the brotherhood of man, inner freedom, and in God we trust. Then as a nation, maybe we can remember the words of President John Kennedy as not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Maybe the best thing we can do for our country is to upgrade our consciousness. I certainly think so. We're real busy trying to get other people to upgrade theirs. We have to upgrade our own consciousness. We desperately need evolution, no more revolution. Think on these things. How can we achieve them? That's personal. That's political. That's beyond the scope of what we ever discuss here. But first of all, we must make a commitment to those ideals in order to get somewhere. So this week's homework leading up to July 4th is simply to think, really think on these things, not necessarily how to implement them. That comes much later when we upgrade our operating system, and it'll be easier after we've upgraded it too. But for now, consider what your personal Declaration of Independence will look like. What ideals will you commit to? Think on these things. Maybe you'll want to upgrade your personal operating system to a program that includes all of mankind, unity and freedom for all. Unity, the brotherhood of mankind, and the inner freedom that will free you from old, outmoded ideas that cause you and everyone else nothing but chaos. Just think on these things. The upgrades can follow. We've got to have the ideals first and commit to them to be more than just a stimulus response conditioned machine. I'd like to end with a quote that could be from the Course of Miracles, Unity, Hinduism, Buddhism, or the Bible. But it was the American native Chief Seattle who said, "Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect." And so it is.